In PHP we can implement objects by defining classes. Object-oriented programming was not a part of PHP since its inception, but was introduced in PHP 4. Though the area of OOP in PHP was not very vast then, it was a footstone in bringing PHP closer to real-world programming. By the end of this module, you will be able to explain the main features of OOPs in PHP. Explain how OOPs is implemented in PHP. Explain how to create interfaces and abstract classes in PHP. Perform inheritance, polymorphism, encapsulation, and overloading in PHP. Explain static and final keywords. Class. This is a data type, which is defined by the programmer and can include member variables and member functions in its definition. It is treated as a template for making instances of the same kind of objects. Object. An object is an individual instance of a class. Many objects of one class can be defined, and they might hold a similar type of data, but with different values. Objects are also referred to as instances. Member variable. These variables are created inside the class and are invisible outside the class. They can only be accessed by the objects of the class outside. They are also available to the member functions of the class in which these member variables are defined. Member functions. These functions are created inside the class and are invisible outside the class. They can be accessed only by the objects of the class outside. They are available to other member functions present in the class in which they are defined. Inheritance. Inheritance is a substantial feature of OOPs in which one class can access the member variables and member functions of other defined classes. Parent class. In inheritance, the class that one or more classes inherit is called parent class. It is also known as a base class or superclass. Child class. A child class is the one which inherits from one or more base classes. Polymorphism. It is a typical object-oriented feature in which different purposes of programming are fulfilled using a single function. The name of the function will remain the same, but it might take different sets of arguments each time it is called to perform different tasks. Overloading. Another feature of OOPs where one or more than one operator has different usage depending on the kind of arguments that are present with it. Function overloading is a famous concept in which different functions are overloaded similarly. Encapsulation. Encapsulation refers to the binding of data variables and functions under a single name, which could be an object of a class. It is a concept of encapsulating data and member functions together, forming an object. Abstraction. When the data is represented in a way that hides the implementation details only to present the part which is necessary to the user, it is called data abstraction. Constructors. They are a special type of function which are automatically called when an object of a class is formed. They can be default or programmer defined. Destructors. They are a special type of function which are automatically called when an object is deleted or is out of scope. The class keyword is used to define a class in PHP. It is followed by the class name, which in this case is *edu class. It is followed by the opening curly brace, which marks the beginning of the scope of the class. The keyword public is an access modifier, which sets the visibility of member variables and functions. In this case, a member variable, $quote, is defined in public visibility. The members that are declared as public can't be accessed everywhere. This variable holds a string value. The next line shows the declaration of a member function, which again has public access. Function keyword is used to define methods in classes, followed by a function name, and parentheses followed by a curly brace, which marks the opening of method scope. The next line uses $the pseudo variable, which is made available when an object calls a method. $this is treated as a reference to the object that is calling the function. In this case, $this variable assigns the value of the quote variable to the referenced object class. In the code, the object $* is created using the keyword new. The class name used with parentheses when a new object is being created is the default constructor of the class that is called whenever an object is created. After the object has been created, we use it to access the display quote method of the class. The == symbol is used to access data members of a class using objects. The output shows the implementation of the objects in PHP. Introduced before, constructors are a special type of functions which are called whenever an object is created. Constructors can be default or user-defined. When constructors are user-defined, they can be used for initializing many data members. PHP has a special function called the construct. A constructor can have as many parameters as the programmer wants. In the code, we created a constructor that initializes the variables $quote and $author. The output shows the implementation of constructor in PHP. When a constructor is created, they occupy some sort of memory in the server. Therefore, we need to free this memory when we reach out of the object scope. This memory freeing is made possible through destructors. Like a constructor function, we can also define destructors using the destruct function. Inheritance is an established programming principle that is used by PHP in its object model. This principle affects the way objects and classes relate to each other. Classes in PHP can optionally inherit from other classes, called the parent classes. When a class inherits from any other class, it inherits its properties and methods according to the parent class member's visibility via objects. Inheritance can be enabled using the extends keyword. Public members. Unless specified differently, in PHP, all the members of a class are public by default. They can be accessed from outside the class in which they are declared, inside the class in which they are declared, inside the class which extends the class in which they are declared. Private members. To limit the accessibility of a member to the class in which it is declared, we use the private accessibility. The private members of a class cannot be accessed from outside the class or from the class which inherits it. A class member can be made private using the keyword private. The methods of a class can access private members of that class. Thus, when we call the member functions using objects of that class, we can indirectly call the private members. Protected members. A protected method and property can be accessed in the class in which it is declared, as well as in all those classes that extend that class. Protected members cannot be accessed outside these classes. The protected keyword is used to make any property or method protected. Interfaces provide common named functions to the classes that implement them. Different implementers might implement these interfaces according to their requirements. All methods in an interface are public. When a class implements an interface, the implement keyword is used. If a class fails to implement any method defined in an interface, it results in a fatal error. More than one interface can be implemented by a class, separated by a comma. The output shows the implementation of interfaces. Constants, at first, may look like variables, but are more like functions when seen closely. This is because constants are immutable. Once they are defined, they cannot be changed. Note that the value of class constants is defined only once, while defining the class, and not with every instance of the class. Declaring constants is easy. The code for implementing constants is shown on your screen. The output shows the implementation of constants. In PHP, there are classes that cannot be used in the object formation, but can be inherited. Abstract classes are defined using the abstract keyword. Any class that contains an abstract method must also be abstract. Abstract methods only contain the method signature and not its implementation. The methods defined as abstract in an abstract class must be defined in the class that inherits it with the same access visibility. The code shown on your screen gives an idea about how to declare and use abstract classes in PHP. The output shows the implementation of abstract classes. In a PHP class, the members declared as static are accessible from outside the class without the use of any instance. A static member function can be accessed with a class object, but not a static member variable. A static method can be called without using the class objects. The methods declared as static do not allow the use of $this keyword inside their function definition. Though it is not required, the object of the class in which a static method is declared can call static functions. The output shows the implementation of static methods. The static variables can also be used outside the class without using the class instance. Also, you cannot use static member variables with objects using --greater than operator. The value of a variable should not be a reserved word or a keyword in PHP. The code shown on your screen shows how to implement static properties in PHP. The output shows the implementation of static properties. The final keyword was introduced in PHP 5. It prevents the child classes from overwriting a method definition. This is done by prefixing the keyword final to them at the time of definition. Classes can also be defined as final. These types of classes cannot be extended any further. The anonymous classes were introduced in PHP 7. As their name suggests, they do not have a name. These classes are used when simple and one-off objects are required to be created. Their implementation is just like a normal class. The code shown on your screen shows how to implement an anonymous class in PHP. The output shows the implementation of anonymous classes. Overloading in PHP is the process of creating properties and methods dynamically. The dynamic entities are processed by using magic methods, which can be established in a class to perform different action types. The methods that perform overload are invoked when interacting with methods or properties that have not been declared or are not visible currently. All overloading methods are defined as public. The overriding function is simple, as it only changes the form of a function of the parent class when declared in the child class. This is done by changing the argument type or the number of arguments. Sometimes, overriding might show a warning when running in PHP, but does not raise an error. Construct, called automatically to inject parameters to set up an object of a class. Destruct, called automatically when a class object is destroyed. Get reacts to the request for the class properties that are not public and are being called outside of the class. Set sets the value to those properties which are not accessible outside the class. IsSet allows using IsSet function to check the presence of properties that are not accessible publicly. Unset catches the request for unsetting a property using unset function. ToString allows you to return an object represented as a string. Sleep allows you to define the properties of the object that should be serialized. Wake up establishes the object in the correct state for unserializing. Call executes when an object invokes a method that is not publicly accessible or is absent from the class. CallStatic executes when the object calls a non-static and publicly inaccessible method. Invoke allows using an object as a function. Clone creates a copy of an object using clone keyword. Encapsulation is a term that has been present in the object-oriented infrastructure since the latter's inception. It means wrapping up or binding related properties and methods in a single program module. Hiding the essential properties of these modules is termed as data abstraction. Encapsulation secures data and information in an object from another object. A simple program for encapsulation is shown on your screen. In the code, the object $* is used to encapsulate all the attributes of the class $encap. The output shows the implementation of encapsulation through objects. The concept of polymorphism describes a pattern in OOPS in which classes can have different functionalities even while sharing a common interface. The code, which is working with the different classes, is not made aware of which class is using it, since all classes use it in a similar way. In the code, on your screen shows how polymorphism can be implemented. The output shows the implementation of polymorphism. The summary of the module on getting started with PHP 7 has been put on the screen. I will pause for a few seconds to allow you to read it. In the next module, we will learn about the implementing connecting with databases. Thanks for watching the video. Let us move ahead with next video.